Hello, I'm Ben and you're watching The PhD Parent. So the current video was originally motivated by others in which I looked at research investigating perceptions of low milk supply and actual low milk supply. And you can check out the links to those videos down below. So in these videos, I mentioned that researchers suggest that the amount of weight a baby is gaining can be an indicator of whether milk supply is low. The idea is that if baby is gaining a normal amount of weight, then this would suggest that mum's milk supply is okay. But then I thought it's probably interesting to discuss baby weight gain in its own right, which is how I ended up with the current video. So the World Health Organization has developed standards that reflect optimal growth. That is, the amount a baby can be expected to grow when provided with adequate nutrition and psychosocial care. The WHO standards were based upon longitudinal observations, that's repeated assessments over time, of about 8,500 healthy breastfed infants and young kids across a range of ethnic backgrounds and cultural settings, including Brazil, Ghana, India, Norway, Oman, and the USA. Now, it's important to note that because these standards were developed based on kids who were exclusively or predominantly breastfed, strictly speaking, they don't apply to kids who have instead been exclusively or predominantly formula fed. Now, use of the WHO standards are recommended by many major medical bodies, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the US Centre for Disease Control, and the National Health and Medical Research Council in Australia. So, given the widespread use of the WHO standards, that's what I'm going to discuss. Also, I'm only going to focus on the first couple of months of life. Anecdotally, that's where most of the interest seems to be for parents. So given my original motivation for this video was low milk supply, I'm going to focus on information most relevant to that, which is weight velocity. So weight velocity is probably an unfamiliar term. I'd never heard of it. But all it means is change in weight over a specified period. For example, grams per day. Apparently, in terms of low milk supply, the reason why weight velocity is considered better to focus on than the overall weight of a kid, otherwise known as attained weight, is because if there's a problem impacting weight gain and you're focusing on overall weight, you may not pick this problem up for a while, as it can take time for altered growth rate to impact overall weight. In other words, focusing on weight velocity rather than overall weight supposedly enables earlier detection of problems. So you can access all of the WHO data at the following link. Now this data is broken down by birth weight in 500 gram increments starting at 2,000 grams. And I'm just going to focus on the figures that are collapsed across all weight increments. And I'm going to report two values. The first value is the median, and the median is the number that sits in the middle of a distribution and can be taken to represent what's typical. The other value is the 5th percentile, which is the lowest the WHO data goes to. According to the CDC, potentially abnormal growth in kids is indicated by scores falling below the 2.3rd percentile. So I'll take the 5th percentile as representing the lower end of normal growth. So on to weight velocity in grams per day. To reiterate two earlier points, all data can be obtained from the WHO website using the previous link, and the following values are for healthy kids who are provided with adequate nutrition, exclusively or predominantly through breastfeeding, and psychosocial care. Now the WHO provides plenty of data, so I'm going to try and simplify things. And to do this, I'll start by looking at the first week of life. So across the first week of life, for boys, median or typical weight gain is around 20 grams per day, though some boys may be losing about 35 grams a day, and that's those in the 5th percentile. The figures are slightly less for girls, with median or typical weight gain being about 15 grams per day, and some girls losing around 30 grams per day. Again, those in the 5th percentile. Now, one thing to mention, which I'll return to in a moment, is that it's not unusual for kids to lose weight in the first week or so of life. So now on to days 14 to 60. So from about 14 to 60 days of age, the median or typical amount of weight that boys put on is around 35 to 45 grams per day, and at the lower end they may gain 20 to 25 grams per day. That's the 5th percentile. And for girls, the values are slightly less. The median or typical amount of weight that girls gain is 30 to 40 grams per day, and at the lower end they may be gaining 15 to 20 grams per day, once more the 5th percentile. So here's a bit more on the issue of early weight loss. So it's common for babies to lose weight in the first few days following birth, which is often due to changes in body fluid composition. Apparently, the percentage of water in premature and full-term babies ranges from about 70 to 85%, which makes them similar to oranges. Anyway, from what I can tell, there's disagreement about how much weight loss is excessive, but greater than 7% and greater than 10% are the most common thresholds indicating excessive weight loss. It's generally expected that most babies will regain their birth weight by 7 days. According to the WHO standards, about 75% of babies will have regained their birth weight by 7 days, and 90% by 14 days. Now, you can't tell this from the data I've reported, it's from the full dataset available on the WHO website. The latter estimate is similar to findings obtained in other studies, where the 90% mark is hit around days 10 to 14. Though not every study has obtained such findings. For example, Paul suggests that it may take between 14 to 21 days before 90% of babies have regained their weight. If it takes 3 weeks or longer for a baby to regain their birth weight, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, for example, recommends referral to paediatric services so that baby can undergo medical assessment. So now on to some important points to note when using the WHO standards. So there are a few points worth mentioning here. First, comparison with the WHO figures is only valid if a baby is weighed accurately. If a baby is not weighed accurately, then the results will likely be misleading. Second, on the issue of low milk supply, the WHO guidelines state that weight gain should not be the sole focus when it comes to determining whether a mum is experiencing problems with breastfeeding. Instead, a holistic approach that considers the overall health of the baby and other indicators of breastfeeding success is recommended. Third, returning to a point flagged when discussing weight velocity, the WHO guidelines suggest that high variation in weight velocity is normal. This means that a baby is unlikely to gain a consistent amount of weight from one day to the next. Instead, kids will tend to bounce around across different percentiles. For example, they might put on 20 grams one day, then 40 grams the next. Lastly, and related to the third point, the WHO guidelines do not provide recommendations concerning how regularly weight should be taken, especially if there are concerns about low milk supply. However, they allude to the idea that weight should be checked every few days rather than every day. I assume the reasoning is that because daily weight gain is unlikely to be consistent compared to weighing semi-regularly, weighing each day may increase parental anxiety without adding much in terms of identifying the trajectory of weight gain or loss. So that's it for baby weight gain. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.